Oh, you're watching Channel Shrimp Fried Rice.
Yo, what's up? It's your groovy fella Tenna from the hit video game Deltarune Chapter 3, available now on PC and other video game adjacent devices. I come to you live from Planet to deliver broadcast, and not just any broadcast, a special one. Today's transmission is a blast from the past. We're talking 2010, baby! That year might be older than some of you watching this video, which is quite terrifying to think about. Anyways, let's chat about a little game that dropped that year. WarioWare D.I.Y. Does anyone in the audience know what D.I.Y. stands for?
Ooh, pick me. I know the answer to this.
Ah yes, the bald guy in the back.
DIY stands for drenched in yogurt. I know this because I like ingesting blueberry yogurt stolen from local libraries.
Nice try, but that is the incorrect answer. Plus, you're bald!
Hey, I may be bald, but at least I ain't an outdated piece of retro slop that would be sold on my show Pawn Stars for $5 whole.
Okay, fine. In the boring, real world, it actually stands for do it yourself. And in this case, you actually gotta do it all yourself. Meaning you gotta draw your own wacky graphics, compose your own legally questionable tunes, and program your very own microgames. Basically, this game was a toolkit that gave you everything you needed to become a game developer. Derogatory term. And it was mine and many others' gateways into this absolutely chaotic world. So seeing as Tenna's, my boss fight in Deltarune Chapter 3, available now on PC and other video game adjacent devices, is one big reference to WarioWare, I figured, why not go full circle and recreate some of those games in WarioWare? So with that being said, let's all say the line together now. It's D.I.Y. time!
Alrighty, let's dive into how these minigames were recreated in WarioWare D.I.Y, starting with the first one I did being... One thing to remember is that in comparison to regular games, these are microgames, meaning I have to basically condense the gameplay to a couple of seconds, basically capturing the essence of the minigame. So what probably took the most amount of time for each microgame here is the art. Drawing on the DS is infinitely more tedious than drawing on a PC, mainly because the screen itself is so small, especially since with this game you can only undo or redo your latest step, so you gotta be extra careful. Each background in WarioWare D.I.Y. has a resolution of 192 pixels by 128, meaning I basically have to take a chunk of the original background and run with it. So after spending well over an hour drawing the Susiezilla background, this is what it looked like. It's pretty accurate, but obviously, I'm restricted with colors as well, which we'll get into in a bit. For now, let's discuss how I translated the gameplay over. I first went ahead and created some placeholder art to represent Susie and the Shadow Guy. The idea I had in mind was simple. Basically, the Shadow Guy would spawn on either side of the screen, and upon being tapped, Susie would charge into him, triggering a win for the game. To get this to work how I wanted it to, let's talk about randomization. In most modern game engines, you typically get built-in randomization functions, usually allowing you to have a random number selected, sometimes having it within a range. WarioWare D.I.Y. functions a bit differently. There's a couple ways to go about randomness, but let's talk about how it can work with the time trigger. We can use the randomly trigger, which makes something happen within a range between 2 points. So, if we combine this with another exact trigger, we could get something like when 1-1 is hit, and when a time from 1-1 to 1-3 is hit, we get a trigger that's activated only for 1-1 and 1-1, but not for 1-1 and 1-2, or 1-1 and 1-3. If you're confused by this, simply go pick up the game and go learn Technique 27 in the Assembly Dojo. If I could do all 32 of these when I was like 9 years old, I'm sure you can too. Anyways, utilizing this technique, I was able to get some gameplay working with Susie and the Shadow Guy spawning on opposite sides of the screen. This is where I also implemented some temporary art for their hit states, as I wanted them to be a bit more lively. Next up, I went ahead and began adding in the actual art for the characters. Susie was pretty straightforward to add, except for one annoying thing. This game does not have pink. This was something complained about ages and ages ago, but yeah, you literally don't have pink as an option when coloring sprites. So, for Susie's hair, I spent some time tinkering with it, and ultimately settled on leaning towards her light world design with brown hair. It's a good compromise, I think. After some time, I was able to create a left and right sprite, an attack sprite, and a laughing sprite for when you win the game. And already with Susie's sprites being completed, the game was feeling that much better. So next up, it was Mr. Shadow Guy's turn. His sprite thankfully was a lot easier to create, as it's simply a white outline filled in with black. So I was able to make an idle plus hit animation for him quite quickly. Alongside this, to add some further detail to the game, I added in both rope and shadow sprites to be attached to both Susie and the Shadow Guy. So with those sprites in, I was super happy with the gameplay. So let's chat about music. Music in DIY is super easy to comprehend. You have up to 4 instrument tracks plus 1 rhythm track. All songs in the microgame editor are 120 beats per minute and are 2 bars of 4/4 time. I assume this limitation was put into place to make speeding up a bit easier to adjust the music to. Anyways, using this tool, I was able to spend some time and make some quick arrangements of some music from Deltarune. With the music added, I did one final playtest and it was perfect and ready to be shipped. When shipping, you can choose the cartridge's design, give it a neat little description, and then you get this cool little animation of the game being loaded up to a truck and sent off. So yeah, that was Susiezilla. And next up, it's time we get Gordon like Ramsay, cause it's time for... I decided from the beginning, this show would be divided into 2 separate microgames. One focused on the catching of food, and another focused on dodging fire. So first up, let's chat about the catching food one. Likewise with Susiezilla, I first went ahead and spent an ungodly amount of time recreating the kitchen backdrop. I chose one side of the kitchen for a specific reason, which I'll get to once we chat about the other minigame. After finishing the background, instead of focusing immediately on gameplay, I wanted to liven up the scene a bit, so I spent some time adding in everyone's favorite fluffy boy, Ralsei. I was able to quickly add him in, and his animations, as they are all slight altercations of the same sprite. I also went ahead and added in a preemptive lose and win sprite, so Ralsei would react depending on the outcome of the game. After this, I went ahead and drew up Chris's sprite. This took next to no time at all, especially since Chris's walking animation is really funny. It's basically their first frame with a flipped body, and that's it. So for the gameplay here, I made it super simple. Basically, 3 foods will spawn from the top of the screen at predetermined times and random positions. And you'd basically have to move to collect the foods. So to move, let's chat about getting the buttons to work. To move in either direction, I added 2 button objects that, when tapped, activate their switches and turn the opposite one off. Switches in WarioWare D.I.Y are such a key fundamental thing to understand in order to make microgames that are really awesome. You can basically equate a switch to a flag in any other game engine. Then I went ahead and made it so that if you bump into either side of the screen, you would go in the opposite direction by toggling the switches. For the food, I made it so that when you collide with the food, their switch gets turned on and they target whatever is the next stackable item. Starting from the plate, to the first food, to the second food, and finally the third food. Once all 3 food switches are turned on, it ends the game in a win. However, if you even let one food drop, you lose this microgame. Now in terms of more detail to this game, I went ahead and redid the buttons to fit more like the UI in the game. Plus, I added it so the soul goes between the 2 buttons, making it really sell the feeling that you are the one in control of Chris here. I also added some walking shadow guys to mimic the original minigame here as well. For music once again, I chose a different section to recreate, and this is where I can obviously mention that you can type custom commands to give at the start of each microgame. So for most of these microgames, I copied the exact command given from the original game. And with that, this microgame was done. So let's ship it on out and get ready for... So next up, let's talk about the second kitchen minigame. In the first one, I specifically chose one side of the kitchen to create because in this one, I could save a ton of time by simply flipping the background and just making the gameplay completely different. First up, instead of Ralsei, I added Susie in this one, creating both an idle and loose sprite. Unfortunately, I could not fit in Susie's kiss the my ass apron, as even in the original game, her sprite is scaled up immensely in order to make the joke be more readable. Next up, I spent a majority of the time creating Chris's sprites for this game. This includes an idle sprite, a loose sprite, and most importantly, the awesome spin jump sprite. Speaking of jumping, let's chat about the code that makes this work. The way I made it work was by making it so that when the jump button switch is turned on, Chris will roam in a vertical pillar and their switch will turn on. Then, when touching the ground/counter and their switch is still on, it'll turn off and they'll be grounded. It's a bit tricky to visualize, but I'll let this debug footage play so you can understand exactly how these switches communicate to each other. Working with the limitations of the game was quite fun to mess with in order to get everything to look super smooth. I also made it so that whenever you press jump, it of course uses the Donkey Kong barrel jump sound, which clearly inspired Toby as he used a very similar sound in the actual minigame. After this, the fire was quite simple to program. I basically made it so that the fire spawns at certain times, falls down, and when touching the counter, it'll go in whichever direction I set it to. Jumping over the fire with the right timing is key here, so I made sure to test this on all speeds to make sure you have enough time from landing to make sure that you could make the next jump. I had to test out and modify the timings of each of the flames, that way there wouldn't be a scenario where you could jump over one, landing directly on top of another, losing the game. After this, I added a couple finishing touches to this game, including making it so that Chris jumps up and down when getting burnt too. I also added the soul once again, which targets the button when pressed, and goes off screen when not pressed. Once again, music was super quick to add, and with that put into place, I gave this game the command dodge fire, and the game was complete. So I once again packaged it up and sent it to get shipped out. With that, it's time we get ready to aim and fire, because it's time for... Next up, I wanted to work on a microgame that didn't have a background that would take a bazillion years to draw, so I figured the shoot the target minigame would be perfect, as the background is simply the iconic grid one used in pretty much every normal battle. So first up for this one, I went ahead and spent some time drawing Chris, Susie, and Rousey all in the exact same cell. I think now's a good time to talk about cells and their values. So, each microgame you make has a maximum point total of 256, and each sprite or cell you create takes up a certain number of points. You can think of each point as a 16 by 16 pixel square. The larger the sprite, the more points it takes up, so you need to think wisely about how to spend your points on art. In this case, I could have technically made Chris, Susie, and Rousey all as separate smaller sprites, but that would likely take up more points than combining them into a single large sprite. Anyways, in terms of gameplay, I wanted this to be similar to the actual minigame, so I first went ahead and programmed a basic enemy in. This enemy would spawn at a random position and target the gang. Then, upon being shot 4 times, you'd win the game. I eventually ended up changing this to be 3 times, as 3 just feels better and makes the game more doable on faster speeds. After this, I spent some time getting down the shooting effects to look right, alongside getting Tenna's look down. It was a bit tricky with the limited colors in this game, but I think I captured his style quite well, as he doesn't fit in with any other sprite in the game. And with both of those in, this is what the game looked like. I'll also mention this, but I got a bit lazy and simply had the test enemy from earlier hide behind everything, and simply made the visuals follow the object. WarioWare D.I.Y games can sometimes rely on hidden objects off the screen in order to get things done, like adding more lines of code, as each object can only have up to 5 conditions set to them. This game didn't really need them, but I figured this would be a good time to showcase that it's a route that many others take. So with those set into place, the game was pretty much done at this point, so I went ahead and polished it up with a couple more hit effects, a reticle, and my best ability at adding a trailing effect to simulate the ghosting effect from the original. Once again, after this game was made, I arranged a new section of Tenna's theme here, and with that, yet another microgame was completed, so I shipped it on out, mentioning that he's the one coming, as a reference to this being the first game that I made with Tenna coming along with it. Next up, get ready to raise up your bat, because it's time for... Alrighty, let's chat about my personal favorite minigame from Chapter 3, Lightners Live. Creating an actual rhythm microgame would be quite challenging, so I focused on having the essence of it replicated to the best of my ability. First up, as usual, I spent a ton of time drawing up the background for the minigame. This time, however, to save on some points and to make everything feel nicer, I added the rhythm track directly in as part of the background. With the background completed, I went ahead and made up some temporary notes to get the gameplay nailed down. Basically, to mimic the rhythm feeling, notes would spawn at set times, and upon being tapped and landing within a very specific zone, the note would disappear and its switch would turn on. Then, once all the note switches are on, the game ends in a win, meaning if you miss even one note here, you lose the microgame, which I think is fair for an extremely short game like this. To give the player some leverage, the node sprites I eventually added have some thicker black borders around them, as I found while testing on the original hardware, it was actually quite tricky to tap them directly as the system and sprites are quite small themselves. I could have made the entire game larger in size, but then I'd lose out on some of the looks of the original game, so I leaned more towards visuals in this case. So with the main gameplay working as intended, I spent some time adding in Chris, Susie, and Ralsei's sprites. I also decided with some of the points left over to add in a couple of effects, this being a shadow under each character just like in the original game, plus a highlight effect for each node to make hitting them that much more rewarding. I think out of all the microgames so far, this one was the most fun to replicate just due to how accurate I was able to get it to look, plus it was quite fun making all three sprites of Chris, Susie, and Ralsei jamming it out. With all the visuals and gameplay done, it was time to of course add in music. This time around, I replicated a chunk from Raise Up Your Bat just to switch things up. So with all that again, I once again packaged this game on up and shipped it on out. Next up, who here is a big fan of horses? I am, especially green ones, so let's jump into... The final minigame I decided to add here was the Wild West shooting one, and it's a bit of a fun one to end off on. The Wild West train background was another super easy one to replicate, seeing as it's a very simple pattern to create the main train itself, and the background isn't super detailed. Where I ran into a bit of an issue here was with the points. So the Windows/Tenna sprite I use here takes up 12 points, and with each animation in place, each one takes up a total of 64 points, meaning I could include 4 total Tenna windows and no other sprite in the game. So with this in mind, I only decided to have 3 windows as it gives me some points left over, and honestly, as I mentioned earlier, 3 is just a much nicer, more satisfying number to work with when creating gameplay for microgames. The gameplay for this one is super simple to comprehend too. Each Tenna window only has 2 pieces of code to it, so let me explain both of those. The first one is what makes him come out of the window. A random time is picked between the start and near the end of the game. The second piece of code just checks to see if Tenna is tapped and the open window animation is playing. If so, a bunch of effects happen, and that Tenna switch is turned on. To win the game, all 3 Tenna switches must be turned on, and that's pretty much it. With the main gameplay done, I also of course had to include the Fun Gang and Horse Ralsei here, and instead of making a sprite animation, I simply made them all bounce in place at the bottom corner. With them added in, I still had a bit of leftover points to spare to add another sprite, so I went ahead and added in a reticle and hit animation to add a bit of flair. With all the little effects in, it was music time once again, so I spent some time making that, and then it was time for one final test before it got shipped out. So with that, all 6 microgames I wanted to add were complete. So now it was time to hop on over to... the Game Blender! Basically, this was the main gameplay mode of WarioWare D.I.Y, where you could play all of Diamond Software's games, including your own. In this case, we're gonna hop over to DIY Games 3, which totally is a reference to these games being made from Chapter 3, by the way. Anyways, I fired it on up, and boom! Everything was working as intended. Each minigame flowed nicely with each other, and with that, I had some awesome recreations of Deltarune's minigames built directly in WarioWare. This was a super fun project to work on, as Deltarune's latest chapters were exceptional. Plus, it brought me back to when I made Chromer Collector almost 4 years ago. Which, like, there's no way it's been that long, right? Anyways, if you would like to play these games, I actually have something quite cool to show off here. This is the Doujinsoft store. This is a massive archive of WarioWare D.I.Y microgames, records, and comics, and you can actually load and play them directly in your browser. I've gone ahead and spent some time extracting and uploading all of the microgames I've made here today to this site. You can find them by searching for my creator name, which is simply Jett, or typing in any of the titles of the microgames. But I'll also leave a link below that'll take you directly to the games as well. If you have the means to, you can also download the .mio files directly and inject them into your save file this way. And with that, what I also wanted to say is...
Ooh, I'm winning the video games. Oh, hi again. I didn't realize the broadcast was still live. 1 second. Alrighty, thanks for tuning in to this very special broadcast live from Planet. If you enjoyed this broadcast, be sure to smash responsibly. That's all for now. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!